Hello and welcome to AA Beyond Belief, the podcast. I'm your host, John S. Today we'll be speaking with Holly D. from Orlando, Florida. Holly shares her experience, strength, and hope with us and talks about integrating the steps into her everyday life. I think you'll enjoy the program. Hello, Holly. Welcome, and thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me, John.
Well, it's so nice of you to agree to do this. I know you've probably got a lot going on over there. So how's your day going anyway?
Pretty good thus far. How about yourself?
Not bad. It's just very, very cold here in KC, so I'm going to stay in all day long.
Coats.
So anyway, usually I like to start these discussions, I guess, just have the person tell me a little bit about their story, you know, what happened, what it's like now, and let's see where that might take us. You want to go into that a little bit?
Sure. For me, I had my first drink, probably about 14, experimenting with grandma's liquor cabinet. I'm Portuguese, so although she never drank her entire life, she would make, alcohol for visitors. And so I was very curious to try that. And I remember my best friend actually to this day was with me, and she didn't partake, and she just sort of looked at me. And I remember watching Saturday Night Live, and I thought it was the funniest thing ever. And it was when Chris Farley was still around, and I enjoyed it. But I was very afraid to disappoint anybody or sort of, get caught. So I didn't really drink again until I was about 16, and I had a very, very overprotective mother, and I wasn't allowed to sleep out often at all. So when I was able to, I really made the most of it. And drugs are a part of my story as well. So I figured out that we could have siblings sometimes pose as parents to say, I'll be home and they'll be safe. And that gave me opportunity to, attend parties. And even from the beginning, I wanted as much alcohol as I could get. And I'd often try to be the boss of the booze and sort of distribute it and hide, some to make sure that I had some for later. And, even shots, I would pour out the shots for everybody. And I remember even early on, pouring normal size shots for others, but, getting a juice glass for myself. And just really the obsession started early on. And by the time I was 18, I had my own apartment, and I was also in a car accident when I was about 17. And so when I turned 18, I had a check for $50,000 and at my own place and, early alcoholism. So that was a recipe for disaster. And, that money, and I worked, but so that really afforded me to purchase my alcohol and had a place of my own. And I always had different people living there. And, the more people that were around, the more money I had to spend on booze. And so I could really just, live the way I wanted to live, which was, drunk or on something else. And so it just continued. It continued that way for many years. And I'm a blackout drinker, and I blacked out most times that I drank, unless I was trying to practice controlled drinking, which never worked out. But I remember, in my early 20s going to, I think my first detox, I remember I was in my early 20s and I was sitting at a bar at 8 o'clock in the morning by myself. And it was one of those third shift bars, but I, of course, wasn't working third shift. I was still partying from the night before. And I just was overcome with sadness. How did I get here at a bar by myself, a young girl, drinking this early in the morning, still have slept from the night before. And, really sad, and I called up my best friend, and she came and picked me up, and I am, very overly dramatic. So I, of course, said, oh, that's it. I'm going to kill myself if I don't get help right now. And somebody's got to do something to help and fix me right now. And so she had brought me to a detox, and I don't think I even had health insurance. And it just so happened that one of the guys that was the intake people knew me, because he was sort of in the same scene. And, but he was sober, and he was able, they even told me, you don't really need detox. You probably need to just go to a 12-step program. But I insisted that they had to take me, and I was not going to take no for an answer. So they did admit me. And I'd probably say once I sobered up, I said, I really don't need to be here. And I took off, I'm sure AMA or unplanned, but, what had happened was, rather than going to college, when I I did graduate high school, but then I decided, instead of going to college, that I was just going to work. And I ended up working at a tattoo parlor. And I felt like the guys that I worked with were, really cool. And I was finally able, to sort of like sit at the cool table and be with the cool kids. And, that sort of environment was really, went hand in hand with, the whole sex, drugs, and rock and roll thing. And, so I really found people that, drank and partied like I did. And, and it wasn't uncommon to be hungover in the morning and to, need to take a little nap at work. It was just sort of acceptable, but even early on, I remember my boss being concerned about me and saying, I like to party too, but I don't understand why, you guys don't know when to turn it off and sort of, function. And I was watching other people, drink heavily, but still be able to purchase homes or to purchase vehicles and to have stuff. And I just, some people say, oh, I came in when I lost everything. I was one of those people that I didn't have anything to lose, really. I always had a roof over my head, and probably some shitty car that I definitely, my cars always looked like an alcoholic drove them. I always had dings and bumps and scrapes and, missing tires and flat tires. But I always had enough to get by, but I never had a good quality of life. So, anyway, that sort of continued. And I thought maybe at one point, well, I'll change my lifestyle and I'll go back to school. And I went to community college and, got an associate's in paralegal studies and tried, working, at a law firm. And, and it was one of those things where a lot of jobs that I had, I always sort of pushed to see how long it was going to take to get fired, because I was calling out all the time because I was hungover, or, I remember one time going into work and I was so hungover, or I don't even know if I had taken something that day, but I fell asleep in the bathroom for like an hour or 2 hours. And nobody even, I just came back and acted as if nothing had happened. But people must have wondered, like, what happened to me? I was not, I was employed most of the time, but I was not employable, really. So anyway, this continued on, and I'd say in my late 20s is when I had reunited with an old friend who later became my husband. And he was sort of like the crazy, the craziest blackout drunk out of the group. And I, had this false sense of pride that I was the crazy, blackout drunk girl. And I thought, wow, how cool is this going to be? Two crazy drunks together, we're going to have a ton of fun. Well, he was also an addict and had introduced me to some harder substances that were new to me. And we had an extremely toxic relationship. And, I remember one night he was, I don't know, I was in a blackout and I came home and I had said that I was, out with a guy or something. And he ended up, physically assaulting me and going to jail. And I, was coming out of my blackout, and nobody knew where I lived because I didn't want my family to have my address, because I didn't want anyone to ever show up unannounced and see the state that I was usually in. So somehow they had gotten a hold of my address, and my father ended up showing up and could see, what I was living, how I was living, and said, what do you want to do? Like, is this what you want to do? And my father is an alcoholic who doesn't drink, but, I said, okay, I'll take some help. I've got to do something. I don't really want to live like this. And so we brought my car to the junkyard, and I don't know, probably got a few bucks for it, and packed up what I could. And he had brought me, I'm from Rhode Island, so he'd brought me to a Butler hospital that had a detox. And luckily I was working at a job where I managed to get health insurance, probably for the first time in my adult life. And so I was able to go to this detox, and they had said, at the time there weren't any, residential treatment programs in Rhode Island. So they said, do you want to go to Connecticut or do you want to go to Florida for treatment? And I said, oh, I've got family in Florida. I'll come on down to Florida. And I did a 30-day or 28-day treatment program down in South Florida. And in that rehab, I was allowed phone time, and I ended up calling my ex, and we decided to work things out. He was going to go to AA, and I was going to do rehab, and then I'd get out and everything would be perfect. I even had my engagement ring shipped to the rehab that I was in.
Wow.
That's how sick I was. And I remember the staff being like, what are you doing? And this is crazy, and you can't see the sickness. And oh, no, I've got this. I'm pretty much cured. I've done, a few days in rehab, so I know exactly what I'm doing, and nobody needs to really tell me much. And so, so I got out of rehab, and I went back to Rhode Island, and we decided, they said, no major changes, for the first year. So I got out, and I think probably a couple weeks later, I got a dog. And then, I got out of detox, I think in November. I think by March I was married.
Wow.
Very classy wedding at the VFW post that was double booked with a quinceañera. And I mean, it was paper little aisle. I mean, I don't think anybody was happy. Everybody just knew it was the worst idea ever. And I'm sure many of my family members and friends cried, but they tried to hide it. And it was really terrible. So anyway, so probably after being married for about a month and a half, and I think I was probably at 6 months sober, and I was going to AA, but I wasn't working the steps. I had a sponsor that was doing, I think, a step study or an AWOL or something. So she wasn't able to start the steps with me, and I probably wasn't at a place to really work them hard anyway. Yeah. So shortly after getting married, my ex-husband said, the sobriety thing, it's really not for me right now. And, I'm going to go back out. You don't have to go back out. I'm going to go back out. And of course, me being extremely insecure, and he's not going to go back out and be at the bar and hit on women and be around booze, and I'm not going to sit at home while that happens. So I said, well, I'm going back out too. And that was probably my last year out. And I would say that I had went to some extremely dark places that I really wasn't even aware existed. And
that is so frightening. It's like you guys both made a conscious decision to go.
Yep. It was game on. It was game on, and we hit the ground running, and it was a disaster. It was an absolute disaster. And so I'd say probably did that for, I don't even know, about a year, a little over a year. And, it was my 30th birthday, and I remember we were hungover or still drunk or something, and we got into a fight, and he pushed me, and I said, you know what? I don't want to be with this guy ever again. And so I packed up my stuff, what I could take, and then I had friends go back later and get the rest of my stuff. And I mean, I didn't have much. And that was actually the last time I had ever seen that man. And I'm 35 now, but I decided I was going to come back down to Florida and live with family, and I was going to to work it out and get better. And, when I got down here, I was living with my aunt, and I thought, well, now that my ex isn't around, maybe I can just try drinking again, and I won't use drugs, and I had done the whole thing before where I would only drink, everything it talks about in the big book. Only drink on certain days. I'd only drink wine. I think at one point my ex-husband told me I could do drugs, but I just couldn't drink. I mean, I tried everything, and of course none of it worked. So while I was down in Florida, I arrived here in June of 2010. And so my cousin was also living at home, and she was of legal age. So we were working at a call center together and were drinking together after work. And one night I was a very, very mean blackout drunk, and I would become extremely aggressive and abusive. And I would tell you everything that you didn't want to hear, maybe thought about yourself, and then some. And so I was just being a terrible person to her, and I'm sure she got over it, and she left me at a bar. And so it was about 2:00 in the morning, and I had picked up some guy at the bar, and I had heard about where I could get some substances, and it was in a very, very, very dangerous area in Florida, and I didn't care. And so I took a cab out there, and I ended up getting robbed at gunpoint, and had nothing left but just the drugs shoved in my bra. And I didn't even have money to pay for the night. Like, it was a $90 cab ride. That's how far we traveled.
Wow.
And luckily my sister's friend used a credit card so that I wouldn't, get arrested for not paying this cab fare. So, and that was an eye opener for me, and you would think that would have been the end, but I still kept going for a couple weeks more after that. But it was time. I still kept going. And so there had been another night where, I was out, with the same cousin, and she had confided in me a few different things. And I was in a blackout, and apparently, I don't even know, she must have left me again, probably because she got over me. And somebody I was blacked out, but somebody had recognized me and knew who my sister was, and had called my sister to say, your sister's here and she's a mess, and somebody's got to come handle her, or something bad's going to happen, or she's going to get arrested. So she ended up coming, and I was threatening her, I think, with physical violence or being verbally abusive, or doing my usual stuff. And she couldn't handle me, And so she called my aunt, and my aunt came. It was the aunt that I was living with. She came and picked me up, and I guess proceeded to tell her everything that her daughter had confided in me, and things that really she didn't need to know, nor did I have any business telling her. And then I woke up in the morning, and I, of course, didn't know any of this until I was told. And my mom had called out of work because, my mom and my aunt had like a mini intervention with me. And I could just see the absolute heartbreak and desperation in their eyes, and their sadness for me. And I thought, I caused that.
Yeah.
I am making them feel this way because of my alcoholism. And, they were like, I didn't have health insurance at the time. And they were like, we don't care where you go or what you do, but you didn't come here to live, in my house and to continue this behavior. And we know that you don't really want to live like this. And so you've got to do something. So I ended up finding some like state-run detox in Delray that would accept you without insurance, and it was super cheap. And so I just went there, and I spent I think like 5 days there, and it was terrible, and there were no meetings, and there was nothing frilly or nice about it. It was basically just cement. And and I remember they didn't even have a pillowcase, and I said, can I have a pillowcase? And they said, no, use your t-shirt. We ran out.
Wow.
And it was exactly what I needed. It was exactly what I needed. And, that detox was a good example of basically, how my life was, and And I got out of that detox on July 26, 2010. And I've been sober ever since. And I immediately, I was ready. I came out of that detox entirely ready to do whatever it took. I was willing. I was desperate. I immediately got into AA. I stuck with, I call her my AA grandma, and I found out, fairly recently that she's passed, but, she was this 72-year-old woman at the time, and little Irish woman, and she had, like 30 years, and I stuck close to her, and I'd pick her up at least once a week, and we'd go set up the meeting, and, I did service work or whatever was asked, and if that just meant setting up chairs, that's what I did.
Yeah.
And I had, different positions and stuff over the years, but, I just, I remember when I got my year, one of the kids saying, you came in really cocky and I didn't think you were going to make it. And I said, I wasn't trying to be cocky. I just was confident that I didn't want to live like that anymore.
You had enough.
I had it.
Yeah.
I had enough.
Yeah. Boy, I sure relate to you on so many different levels. The one thing that you kept talking, you've mentioned that I experienced was being a blackout drinker as well. And you kind of brought home to me the absolute fear and bewilderment when other people would talk to me about my drinking or what they may have seen me or whatever. And I was just so confused and terrified because I really had no memory of whatever the hell I did.
Right.
And when you were talking about your boss who was saying, I just don't understand why you guys can't just turn it off.
Right.
And that was the frustrating part for me too, because you're surrounded by people you went to school with, whoever, who were drinking normally, or at least partying, but they could turn the party off and we couldn't. And it's just, our stories are so powerful. I mean, just listening to that, just made me understand that, I'm in the right place.
Right.
I definitely shouldn't be drinking.
Absolutely.
So did you start out going to meetings in Orlando?
No, it was actually in Port St. Lucie, Florida is where I got sober.
Okay.
And I went to traditional meetings. And, I really had spent the majority of my life either agnostic or atheist. I just, even as a kid, I just never felt a connection to like a God or.
Yeah.
And so I went to Catholic school when I was much younger, just for a few years. And even then, like, I never felt like in my heart that there was a God. But, my father, when he got sober, he did AA for a year and then decided to go the born again Christian route. And so he had brought me to church, on and off when I was younger. But I just, I'd go through the motions, but I never felt anything. And then,
I was the same way. I don't know if I didn't believe or not believe. I just felt like I was incapable of having whatever that belief was.
Sure. Sure.
But so did you have a problem with AA when you first got in because of the God thing?
No, because I was so desperate that I was like, if these people tell me that I have to believe in God to stay sober, I'm a very extreme person. So I'm like, if I'm going to believe in God, then I'm going to go, and I tried some non-denominational churches. Like I tried like a biker church, and, I ended up finding this church that the people were really nice. And I said, well, if I'm going to do it, then I'm going to be a Christian, and I'm going to be a really good Christian. I'm going to tithe. I'm going to do whatever they tell me to do, and I was trying, but I kept bringing like, I would go to church and I would say, this doesn't make sense. And like, the Bible says this, and this isn't adding up to me. Can somebody explain this? I was questioning everything. And I think they were trying to be really loving, but at the same time, I remember like at one point they were like, this is what it says. And like, either you believe or you don't believe, basically. And I was thinking, I just don't buy it. I just don't buy it. And so, but in the beginning, it was like, whatever you tell me, I'm going to do. And then finally I got to the point where I was like, this is not working for me. I feel like the square peg in the round hole, and there's gotta be people out there that are in AA that are staying sober and that don't believe in God. There just has to be someone somewhere. So when I moved to the Orlando area, well, I actually moved outside of Orlando, and I called Intergroup and I said, has anybody heard of Agnostic AA or is there any kind of alternative group? And they said, it just so happens that there is one in Orlando. And
How about that?
that's our mostly agnostic groups of drunks. And I know,
Yep.
you know, Mikey, and he's
Yep.
one of the people that started that meeting, or he was the first one that
Uh-huh.
joined everybody. So, you know, I ended up going and checking out that meeting, and what a sense of relief. And there were people there telling me it's okay. You
Yeah.
can be true to yourself. You don't have to pretend that you believe in God anymore. And we'll show you, you know, what we do to tweak the program
Uh-huh.
to make sense. And I said, wow, you know, like, wow, this is awesome. And you know, Mikey is now my sponsor. He became my sponsor
Uh-huh.
shortly after. And it's been so awesome, you know, to make this program work for me, and to thine own self be true, and to have to
Yeah.
fake it till I make it, because that was never going to work for me.
That's so cool that the intergroup, well, obviously ours is that way too, that they actually they could refer you to them, that they were aware of that group and knew that it was right for you.
Yeah, it actually took, you know, I think he said initially, like, you know, I don't think so, but he ended up researching it and calling me back and saying, oh, you know, by the way, yeah, here it is. And
Oh.
from what I can remember, so I'm really grateful for that, because I don't know where I would be if, you know.
Yeah. The thing with me, I went way too long trying to do I don't know what I was doing, but I eventually got to the point after decades where I was either going to leave AA, or I needed to find some other way to do it, because I couldn't go to meetings anymore and not be honest. So thank goodness for this. You know, I was like you. It was a relief for me to find that there were these alternatives, but we didn't have a group in Kansas City, but I was able to help start one. So, and it's just turned things around.
Absolutely.
So do you, you know, when I was starting off in this thing too, I was amazed by all the diversity amongst us atheists and agnostics. Like, some people have absolutely no use for the steps, and some people do. And how do you feel about that? Do you work the steps and that type of thing?
I find the steps, you know, very helpful. And the
Yeah.
first time I worked them, obviously I did them traditionally, the best I could at the time. And I remember questioning my sponsor at the time a lot with the God stuff, because I'm like, this just doesn't make sense. And like, how, you know, I can't, and she just kept basically saying, you know, just do it. You know, basically, I think her answer for a lot of it was like the whole believe what I believe until you figure it out type of deal. And so, but I have reworked the steps with my sponsor since coming in and finding Agnostic AA, and
Mm-hmm.
using resources, you know, to help me. And yeah, I mean, when you just really look at the root of what they're about,
Mm-hmm.
it makes a lot of sense, and it's very helpful. You know, I find, you know, doing, you know, a 10 and 11 daily, you know, have I been a jerk today? You know, and have I been a
Yeah.
jerk too? And is there something I can do to make it right? Or does that just look like maybe apologizing or trying to not do the behavior? You know, 6 and 7
Mm-hmm.
character defects. You know, I wish I believed in a God that could just poof and take away everything that, you know, is wrong with me, and the negative characteristics that I have. I don't
Mm-hmm.
find that to be true. So, you know, realizing that I act a certain way that's not really suiting me any longer, and what can I do to change that
Yeah.
behavior, and then practicing that. Um,
That is so cool because, you know, step 6 and 7, I think that the people who believe in God, I don't think that they really get the benefit out of those steps that we who don't believe in God get.
sure.
Because if you think that God's just going to take it away, I mean, all you do is sit there and pray, and but then you know that God never really takes them away, because it says that in our reading. But for us, it's like we have to be aware of our own behavior, and then try to, just through determination, I guess, and patience with ourselves, you know, try to improve over time
Absolutely.
and be honest with ourselves about it. Where I think that a lot of the religious people, and I'm just kind of guessing, but I think that those two steps are given more lip service than anything else, because it's more like they're going to ask God to do it, but they know that God never will take them all away for whatever reason.
Right, right,
If he's
right.
God, you think he would, but apparently he doesn't want to.
Correct. It's not available at the time. Yeah.
But anyway, yeah, I'm the same way, I guess. The first thing I did when I realized I was an atheist is I went through the steps with a new perspective, and I found it was pretty easy to do because they do borrow from psychology as well as religion in those steps. So there's certainly a lot of psychological benefit. But my attitude changed about them because I was a real believer that if I didn't do the steps, I was going to end up getting drunk.
Sure. Absolutely.
And I don't feel that way anymore. I feel like they add to my life. There's no club that I'm going to be beaten with if I don't do them, other than I won't have some tools, I guess, that I can use in my regular daily life. But yeah.
Well, I do think that possibly, I feel like that could be true if, and I do believe that secrets can keep us sick. And I do think that it's really important to, do a fourth and fifth step when you first come in and dump all of that stuff. Because for me anyway, guilt definitely kept me drinking, was one of the things that definitely fueled my alcoholism. And so if I'm still carrying that stuff and feeling guilty about that stuff, then who knows, where I'd be if I didn't sort of get rid of it.
That's very true. It helped me tremendously to get some basic understanding of myself about what made me tick and why I acted the way I did. And it also did get to the root of the drinking. And I think that they were pretty brilliant about that in AA early on when they wrote the steps,
Sure.
because they knew that we alcoholics, the drinking really was a symptom, that we had to get down to really what was it underneath us that was causing us to drink. For me, it was pretty obvious and to a certain extent, although my drinking was already out of control. But when my mother committed suicide, that was my drinking just went crazy after that. And I remember actually sitting in bars drinking and reliving her death. So it's like that was obviously a resentment, and I drank for 5 years almost on a daily basis, and that was the overriding thing that drove my alcoholism, and I didn't even know it. But it should have been obvious. But when I did my fourth step and fifth step, then it became real obvious about what I was carrying with me. But I didn't know it all that time. I had no idea. I stuffed it, I guess, and drowned out the feelings.
And I'm sorry for your loss.
Oh, no, well, thank you. That was a long, long time ago, but it was what, like I say, I think I was already out of control drinking before that she died, but that was just further fuel for my alcoholism. So there's a lot to that. I mean, had I not done steps 4 and 5, I don't know if I ever would have really faced that. I don't know if I ever would have really, that gave me a way, I guess, to deal with it.
Right.
And this was many, many years after the fact, and I still had to deal with it. So I've dealt with it. Not to say that it still doesn't affect me in some way, but it doesn't drive me and drive my life like it used to. And resentments do that to us, I think.
Absolutely.
So I think there's a lot of truth to that. So yeah, for those people that don't do the steps, I think also that even if you don't actually go through the process of doing the steps with a sponsor or whatever, I think almost through osmosis, you kind of pick up a lot of it just by going to meetings anyway,
Right.
because you're getting honest with people. You might be talking to people after meetings about things. You might be recognizing stuff about yourself that you wouldn't be recognizing had you not been going to those meetings. And so there's a lot of, just like they say here, the magic in the meetings, I think, too.
Absolutely.
So, yeah. Well, I don't know what to say after that. I hope I didn't bring the conversation down a little bit with my own.
No. I work, at a rehab, and I hear a lot of stuff. So
yeah.
absolutely not.
When you're working in the rehab, do you run across people who have problems with AA because of the belief system and that type of thing? Are you able to talk to them about that?
Yes. I try to make it known to the therapists that if they have anybody that, and the difference too is I don't really need to have a conversation with anybody about agnostic, or being an atheist in AA that is just mad at God. Because if they truly in their heart believe in God, then they need to work that resentment out so that they can have sobriety. But if somebody just truly doesn't believe, then I would absolutely, I always ask, please send them my way, because, I keep books in my office. And so anytime I have somebody that is interested in Agnostic AA, I give them literature. And if they're locals, I let them know about our meeting. And it's really cool, when I actually see a patient make it to our meeting and that they really did follow through and they really are getting it. And that's just so awesome to see. But I don't, because I think that this thing is still not really that widespread and people just really don't understand that we are out there and they can do it. And it's just, there's just not enough exposure yet to it. So I have such an awesome opportunity to share that with people that may never be able to get it otherwise.
Yep. Yeah, that's very true. We aren't quite that widespread. I think we're growing, and I think we'll continue to grow. But yeah, there's a lot of people who have no clue. And, heck, I didn't for a long, this agnostic AA stuff's been going around since 1975. Wow. I had no idea until a few years ago, that it even existed. So,
right. So I sort of get to be, a lot of times the first person telling somebody, yeah, it exists. And you can, it's like, you can see like the little light go off, the little light bulb, and it's like, wow, really? Like, that's a thing? Like, I can do that? And it's like, yeah, you can. Like, I'm doing it. So I'm here to tell you that you don't have to listen to anybody that's telling you you're not going to stay sober if you don't believe in God, if that's not your belief. And like, we are living proof that it's possible. And that's so reassuring, like, because there's so much fear there, I think. I mean, for me, it was like, there was so much fear because I just never, ever want to go back to the way I used to live. And so it's such relief knowing that you don't have to have that fear. It's an irrational fear. You can do it without God.
Absolutely. And your group sounds like it's such a fun group. I mean, when I was talking to Mikey the other day, and you do things that are really unique. Like the one thing that Mikey was talking about that I was really impressed by is that he wants people to be comfortable in traditional AA meetings.
Yes.
He thinks that's really important. And when we were talking about that, it kind of helped me kind of change my perspective a little bit, because I quite frankly have been avoiding traditional AA meetings. I don't have to go to them because we have enough here now that I just go to agnostic meetings. But he said, no, you need to be comfortable in traditional meetings because you never know when you're going to be out of town or on a trip or something, and you won't have agnostic AA meetings, and you need to learn how to deal with the traditional meetings as an atheist or an agnostic. And he actually helps people in your group to do that.
He's helped me personally to do that, because I remember finally after finding, that group and then going to traditional meetings, I was sort of like getting really angry because I was like hyper aware of how much God talk is happening.
Yeah.
And so I would leave, and I was calling him a lot back then because I'm like, can you believe it? And I remember one meeting, I was so on fire about agnostic AA that I wanted to like tell everybody in AA that this existed. So I live in the country, and it's very God heavy. And so I remember telling people like, hey, there's an agnostic meeting in Orlando. If anybody's, when they say, does anybody have any announcements? And I'd raise my hand all excited. And I found that I needed to stop doing that because I feel like the meetings kind of topic turned toward that. And I just that wasn't my goal. I didn't need a lecture. I was telling everybody because I didn't know if there are other people like me that needed this tool. So people sort of know now, so I don't even need to say it. And I've shared my story locally. So I think that, and it's a small town. So I think people pretty much know that I'm like, the atheist. And so, but I do go because I like to go to a couple meetings a week, and I do the online version of our meeting every Tuesday.
Oh yeah.
Orlando's like an hour for me, so I basically just go the last meeting of the month because that's when we have our business meeting, and then I do the online one every week. But so that's not really enough. I need to at least go to another meeting, and so the only option I really have is a traditional meeting. And I'm okay with it now. And I really do the whole take what I can and leave the rest. And it's a good opportunity to practice patience because I'm a very impatient person. And like I said, especially where I live, the meetings tend to be, and I know which ones are super God heavy, and I have those because those I really sort of leave extra frustrated. But, just the normal, whatever the normal amount of God talk is, I can tolerate, and I just try to pass it.
I think I can too. And I know, I think the majority of the people that actually go to AA are not real churchgoers, except for maybe in some communities they are. But here in the urban area where I live in Kansas City, not so many, are that religious, but they might be kind of fundamentalist about AA itself.
Right.
But, for the most part, they they aren't going to give me a hard time. But yeah, I've just not challenged myself. I'm going to start doing it though, because I do believe it's important to be integrated into the whole of AA and not to be seen as something outside of AA or different from the rest of it or anything like that, because we're really not.
Right.
So,
but I do think twice sometimes when I share, because sometimes I'm like, if I'm totally honest, because I feel like, there's so few of us, we kind of do represent the whole like atheist AA scene. So I'm like, if I really if I'm like, so I'm so grateful that I do have at least that home group that I can go in there and I can say whatever I need to say and just be totally honest and just let it all loose and not be judged and find a solution without God.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, we had a little meeting. We had our meeting on Thursday. I don't know. It kind of bugged me a little bit. I had a reading. I took it out of Adam N's book, Common Sense Recovery. Anyway, it was a strictly hardcore atheist reading where we kind of mocked. It was called the Puppeteer God or something. We kind of mocked God a little bit in the reading. But anyway, ultimately, the whole reading was all about how, okay, we don't believe that there's a God, but what these people see going on that they might attribute to God is actually all the people in their lives, and that's what we need to connect with. But anyway, that's what I saw in the reading. But everyone else felt like we read something that if believers were in the meeting, they would feel uncomfortable. And I was kind of like, I was a little frustrated. It's like, wait a second, why do we have to go out of our way to make believers feel comfortable when they're not doing that for us when we go to their meetings? I don't know, but I guess that was a little bit too heavy for my group. They like to have more, I don't know, program stuff, but not coming from God. They like to just have the religion, atheism, and agnostic thing taken off the table completely, I think.
Right. Yep.
So,
well, there's different personalities, and that's what's great because we all balance each other out.
Yeah. But I do like that line that we read. I don't know if you guys do. Did you read the agnostic preamble when you start your meetings?
No, Mikey, we have a script that we read, but usually we just, we don't really do any traditional readings. I think we basically just kind of give the format of the meeting. And then when we close, we do the responsibility pledge.
Yeah, you know what? That's right. I remember he was saying that they used to do that, but he said that by doing that, it would bring God out as a subject to begin with. So they just did away with all of that. And in doing that, they can have a meeting where it's just completely off the table.
Right.
It's just not even anything for discussion even.
Yeah, the only
whether
time
you believe or not.
And I would say in the beginning when we were, when there were more people finding out about this for the first time, there was more talk about, I know because when I was a newcomer to that group, I had so many questions. And so, God would come up more often because of, questions about how to work the steps certain ways and stuff. But I would say now that there are more people attending regularly and it's just grown, there's less and less of that. And it's more just about like, what's the solution? And sometimes, God's mentioned very infrequently.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I guess just to wind it up, how are things going nowadays? What are you up to now in your life?
Things are good. I am, like I said, I work, at a treatment center and still sober, and that's pretty much it. I mean, I don't get too involved in service right now. Like I try to do things like this, and I'm actually going to be speaking at the rehab one time this week. But, I go through different phases of service work. And sometimes when I feel like other parts of my life are full, then I just sort of take a step back a little bit.
Well, what you did here today by sharing your story on this podcast is a huge help, because there are people out there that need to hear stories from people that they can relate to, and because they feel like they're all alone sometimes in their AA meetings in their towns. So this is very helpful what you're doing, and I appreciate you taking the time to do it. It means a lot to a lot of people.
Thank you. I think now I'm working on more, growing as a person and looking at some stuff that, I'm sure has to do with my alcoholism, but more character defects and stuff like that, as in how people say I came in for my drinking, but I stayed for my thinking. So I'd say after, my first 5 years, now it's sort of like, okay, what about the other stuff? What about, looking at emotional sobriety and how I interact with others and just some other stuff that I was too busy learning out how to be sober to really look at. And now that it's like, okay, know how to not drink, now really looking at other stuff.
Yep. And I tell you, that's where I'm at too. After 27 years, I'm still working on stuff, but I'm glad that I am, because I have learned a lot here this last year or two, especially with how I my interactions with people and how I kind of get sucked into things I probably shouldn't get sucked into and that kind of thing. So it's good. It's good.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm dealing with some, I realize my anxiety, it's weird because I know my anxiety was always an issue for me. And I'm sure, I drank what am I trying to say? I drank because of anxiety on numerous occasions. But I would say learning, how to handle anxiety sober, because I feel like anxiety could probably trigger a lot of people to go back out, and I don't want it to happen to me. So it's, how do I cope with that? And so just trying to learn different techniques and working with some, outside sources to sort of manage that, because I almost feel like my anxiety has escalated in sobriety. I know that probably sounds
that makes sense. Yeah, it's almost like we become more aware of it.
Yeah. So
there's nothing else, because you're right. Drinking was a definite way to take care of that. It's
like, wow, I'm a really anxious person, and that anxiety gets triggered. Especially with job changes, and after my promotion, it's like, it goes back up, and then I have to learn how to get it back down and to find relief, because if I don't find relief, with other coping mechanisms, then my brain will default to alcohol being my relief.
Yeah. I do the same thing. And with me, anxiety is a big thing. Depression is a big thing. I get a little confused sometimes because of the two. And the steps have helped me a lot. The support within AA helps me a lot. But I'm going to start looking at some other things too. Like some people recently have gotten me interested in SMART recovery and CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. I'm going to look into that a little bit, see if maybe there's some benefit in that. I don't know or not. But...
Yeah, I've done a little CBT, and it is very helpful.
Is it really?
I found that it was helpful.
I got to learn about that. I think I will. I'm hearing more and more about it all the time. So I think that's going to be my next journey for me in my recovery, is to learn about that.
Absolutely. I find it helpful.
Okay. Well, Holly, thank you so much for the talk. I appreciate it. We'll be putting this on here pretty soon.
Okay.
And so it'll probably be Wednesday. We'll put it out.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for speaking with me and giving me an opportunity to share my story.
Well, that's it for another episode of AA Beyond Belief, the podcast. We hope you enjoyed it. We'll be back soon with some interesting guests. So until then, be well and take care.